Assalamu alaikum. My name is Adil Kawaja, and welcome to the BMAG Podcast, where we highlight organizations and individuals working on social justice issues facing the Muslim Ummah. Today, we'll be talking about the ICJ ruling with experienced litigator Wasif Mehmood. This past week, despite an international court of justice ruling calling for the protection of Palestinian lives, the Israeli war machine continues its rate of killing civilians and genocidal war crimes. Over 11,000 children have been killed since October 7th, and daily civilian death toll continues to be around 200 people each day. Almost the entire population of Gaza now relies on aid handouts for the basics of life. Over 700,000 people have been estimated to be suffering from contagious diseases, including skin diseases, infections, diarrhea, and jaundice, all as a result of overcrowding in shelters, lack of food, water, and the breakdown of the healthcare system. The ICJ ruling also ordered Israel to ensure the unrestricted flow of aid and services to reach Palestinians under the siege in Gaza. But instead of ensuring aid increasing into Gaza, over 10 countries have stopped funding UNRWA following the release, conveniently after the ICJ ruling, of a 6-page Israeli dossier stating 12 UNRWA workers were involved in October 7th attacks. UNRWA is a lifeline for the people of Gaza, who are already dying of hunger. Gazans are resorting to drinking polluted water or trying to capture water from rainfall on their tents, eating grass, and even grinding down animal feed for use for bread. Set up in 1949, UNRWA was set up for the refugees of the Nakba and tends to millions of original refugees and descendants across Palestinian lands. Little emphasis, however, is given to the over 152 UNRWA workers that have been killed by Israel since October 7th. In a joint statement by 21 humanitarian organizations, including Oxfam, Action Aid, and Save the Children, they said they were shocked by the reckless decision to cut a lifeline for an entire population by some of the very countries that had called for aid to be stepped up and for humanitarian workers to be protected while doing their job. To highlight the significance of the funding cut, UNRWA calculated that to address the priority humanitarian needs of Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, it needed $231 million. The report also highlighted the rise in Israeli operations targeting the refugee camps, forced displacement, increase in settler violence, and the impact of violence to children by Israeli authorities back in 2020. Jonathan Crick, Chief of Communications of UNICEF Palestine, has stated recently that 19,000 children have been orphaned. 19,000 children. Many of these children have been found under the rubble or have lost their parents in the bombings of their homes. Others have been found at Israeli checkpoints, at hospitals, or even just wandering the streets. Children, like the one that you see on the screen, who was born by cesarean section when her mother, Hannah, was crushed in an Israeli airstrike. Hannah did not live to name her daughter, and the father's fate remains unknown. Or Abed Hussein, who, when faced by a BBC reporter, stated the bomb fell on my mum's lap, and it took days for us to get her body parts out from the rubble under our house. Up and down the country and across the world, people continue to protest and disrupt parliaments to call for a ceasefire. We are starting to see what can happen when people choose to organize and relentlessly stand up against governments that support genocide. Just this week, in the last few days, we have seen Chicago become the biggest US state to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. This was only possible after tireless campaigning by ordinary members of the public and pro-Palestine activists, forcing the conversation to remain alive with the elected officials. To discuss where we go from here and the impact of the ICJ ruling, I sat down with Wasif Mehmood earlier today. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the BMAG Podcast. I'm glad to have Wasif Mehmood joining us on the call today. Wasif is an established litigator. He's had held a number of hats, a graduate of Queen Mary's and SOAS universities, who's recently set up a legal firm called Five Pillars Law. Assalamu alaikum, Wasif.
Wa alaikum salam, Adil. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. I hope you're well.
Okay.
So today we're focusing on the recent ICJ ruling and more generally sort of human rights issues that are affecting the Muslim Ummah in the UK and obviously around the world. Initially, I just wanted to, by way of an introduction, if you'd like to introduce yourself and what you're currently doing.
Sure. So obviously you've got my name, everything else, but it's in terms of the details of what I'm doing. I'm a lawyer by trade. I've been a solicitor now for, oh, I can't tell you how many PQ I've got now, but enough. More than a decade and a half doing law within the city primarily, but then I've always had a focus on human rights law. I started on that. There was a principle that I always had: three passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, govern your life: search for knowledge, longing for love, unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. And those were the things that really got me into the law at the beginning. And that's something I've now carried on. And so recently I got the opportunity and the chance to uh, do human rights law again. And it so happened that it came at the time of the Gaza conflict, and it's something that I've been really focusing on right now.
So last week we had a GP, a local GP, who works with BEMA, and he's essentially the same thing. He's been doing a lot of work with the Muslim community in his personal and professional life, but obviously since October 7th and the most recent rise in atrocities over there and the potential genocide, as we've heard from the ICJ ruling, his life's completely changed. So since October 7th, have I understand you've been doing quite a few different things that you normally would. So could you elaborate on some of the cases that you've taken up?
Well, absolutely. So BEMA is actually an organization that I've worked with as well, because I suppose the surprising thing is, having done this work, you realize how so many different Muslim communities are coordinating
Yeah.
and that so many different professions are coordinating. I wasn't aware of BEMA before October 7th,
Mm.
but all of a sudden I became aware because of the need for their support on a case that I was doing. This case was involving a student at university who had put a post out, and as a result of that post, the university said, "We're not happy with that. You have certain rules and regulations because we followed the IHRA definition." So that's the International Holocaust Memorial Alliance definition of what anti-Semitism is. And there was a breach of that, and we want you to be suspended from the course, or you're removed from the course until such time as we've investigated the matter. And I went through that process because it was a very, very difficult process for that particular student. And uh, there was no real right of appeal. So there's a lot of things that have come out of these cases that we need to necessarily look at and think about. But using coordinated efforts with regards to BEMA, with regards to other organizations as well, the student unions, we were able to kind of, well, fight the case more importantly based on the IHRA definition, which we think is not a definition at all. You can't have a definition where basically seven of the points don't even relate to the actual issue of anti-Semitism, but relate to the criticism of the state of Israel. And that basically means that it's not a definition, really. Um, and we used a lot of help from professors, so Professor Avi Schleim, you know,
Right.
Sir John Duggard, the work on this particular area and what they've said about the definition of anti-Semitism has been very, very important. Of course, no one condones anything in relation to the Jewish population in terms of saying anything bad that is anti-Semitic. But we think the IHRA definition is not a useful definition because it doesn't allow for free speech and free criticism where it should be allowed.
Mm. So, I mean, you mentioned about no right of appeal and some of the challenges that you faced when you were looking at the case. It's something that was brought up by BEMA as well when they first started about trying to look at how they could help the community in these kind of situations.
Mm.
What they found that there wasn't that much in terms of a process or a protocol or organization that they could go to help their members, a part of the medical community. So is that something that you kind of found that there wasn't really a process that was established that you could work with?
Absolutely. I think that was the thing. A lot of these cases, we were almost finding our feet as we were going along. What you're used to, for example, as a lawyer, is a very clear idea of you present your case, it's an open panel, and that open panel will effectively be independent of anything else, and it will make that decision. What we were finding here was that the poacher became the gatekeeper in some instances of where these panels were set up. And so we were looking externally at how panels are set up and how the policies got to such a stage that you can have effectively just the whim of that particular person making the decision of whether or not this person stays or goes. Now, albeit if you're a professional, it's a lot easier, but if you're a student, it's a lot harder because as a student, you're bound by the rules of the university that you're with. And so that becomes a lot more harder for you to justify. Uh, uh, but as a medical professional, you do have more rights, and there has been good work that's being done so far, including work from BMA, including work from the BMA and GMC, to basically say, well, actually, you can't have a totally apolitical stance if you're a doctor, because we aren't apolitical animals. We are human animals. And so, well, I shouldn't use that word human animals in
Yeah,
that
it's a
way.
bit contentious.
After
Yeah.
after how it has been used really badly in this conflict, but certainly in nature, that is what
Yes.
we are, human. Um, and doctors have opinions just like everybody else. And so it was quite useful for us to be able to look at the processes and procedures. And actually, what ended up happening is that it only really came to a head when you went down a nuclear option. So an option where basically outside of the university or an organization outside of the university that needed to then take a decision. And that's how we eventually got over the line. And well, it was very easy to see that, these statements are statements that are not anti-Semitic. They're very political, yes, that's absolutely fine, but they're not anti-Semitic. And uh, our, our, we were lucky enough to win our case.
So this is the thing. So there is a lot of there's a lot of anxiety about talking about it in all kinds of fields, and obviously this case for the student has highlighted it as well. And even amongst peers at work, in social circles, or even if in organizations that are trying to do something, even in the mosques, they're very apprehensive. And I know there's been a lot of work since October 7th, and since with all the things that have been happening in Gaza, there has been a lot of work about how people should or are able to talk about the atrocities that are happening without being labeled anti-Semitic. Is there any advice that you have, I mean, just for the general public about raising awareness?
I think you have to be very clear that there is the freedom of expression that we have. So we have the Equalities Act 2010 that came out, and the Equalities Act allow us to hold political opinions, hold political beliefs within uh, uh, a company, within our place of employment. That being said, there are obviously internal policies that will always impact. It's how far they go over or beyond what the Equality Act says that you can and cannot do. And I, again, have come across cases where people have said, I posted something on LinkedIn and I'm now effectively banned, or someone's picked it up at my workplace and now I'm being disciplined by my uh, regulatory body. What I'm finding with these cases is that they're not really cases that are going to go anywhere in relation to actually stopping that particular person from doing their job. What it is a time wasting exercise. And that's what I found. A lot of Zionist bots that are on the internet that support this, they're picking things up and then basically putting them forward, making these random complaints, using sources like the Metropolitan Police, or using other sources such as the Regulatory Council for each of these particular professionals,
Mm.
and connecting them to a newspaper, like, for example, the Daily Telegraph has been very prominent in this. The Daily Mail has been very prominent in this in terms of picking up these particular stories, and then running those particular stories like a triumvirate, where you have different people attacking from different ways, and then that person actually being stuck. So once you then pick it all apart, it's just been a time wasting exercise, and that usually you're able to kind of get that person back to where they need to be.
I guess on your, if you want to give your personal opinion about this as well, that there has been, I mean, I've definitely seen, and we know people, even in not only students but academics who have been targeted, and it does seem like a targeted approach of trying to silence any kind of criticism of Israel. Is this something that is this established? Is this something new? And what do you think people are trying to gain out of this? And what, in terms of our response, is it something that we should really be cautious of, or is this unfounded?
I think it's absolutely fundamental that we enjoy a freedom of expression and a freedom of thought. And that includes the ability to criticize the state of Israel. So
Yeah,
even with certain definitions under the IHRA, there have been caveats that have been taken from discussions in Parliament that have said that should not include, discussions in relation to criticizing the state of Israel. So if you do criticize the state of Israel, that should be allowed.
yeah.
So
Just as freely as it's allowed to criticize Iran
yeah,
over these certain policies,
absolutely,
that's not
absolutely. And
Islamophobic. So
there's, you know, what we have to be very careful of is the weaponization of anti-Semitism.
yeah,
Now, there is a Jewish rabbi that wrote in I believe it was a quote that he wrote at the start of the book that Norman Finkelstein wrote in the Holocaust industry. And what he wrote in that was very poignant because it's a Jewish rabbi in New Jersey who says, the problem with the Holocaust is that it is sold, it is not taught. So
mm,
it's really, really important, first and foremost, to understand the importance of what the Holocaust was and how bad it was and who was affected and how many people were killed.
absolutely.
There's no denial of what the Holocaust was. But what it does also mean is that we can't dishonor the memory of something like that by not teaching it properly, by
Yeah,
effectively doing something to that particular time in history and selling it as a product, because that is what the weaponization of anti-Semitism is becoming.
mm,
And it shouldn't be. It should be hate against Jewish people, which is completely wrong. You should never have any hate against Jewish people. And that's where it should lie. And it should say this is where it ends up. However, what you shouldn't do is perpetrate new acts of terror and new acts of horror, and effectively call it something else.
exactly. I just want to move the conversation on to
So,
the ICJ ruling as well. So we had the obviously the verdict on Thursday afternoon, or was it Friday afternoon? Apologies. And there's obviously since then there's been a lot of commentary about the significance of it, or if it didn't go far enough. I mean, the commentary has been as far as saying this is a watershed moment, and this is the first time Israel's been potentially held to account, and the potential of genocide's been acknowledged. And some people, so some people have said that obviously it's not gone far enough. They obviously the omission of the ceasefire there as well. So, what's your perception of it? How should we looking at this in terms of the actual outcome, and where can it lead to?
I think where you have to start with anything in terms of the ICJ ruling is the fact that this is a process of law that is taking place. And it's how and in which way that process of law has moved to what stage. So what we had was an application that was made by the state of South Africa, a very, very strong application, I must say, um, based on the evidence that they presented, which was to say we want an interim injunction. Now, an interim injunction is like something crazy, like, for example, your bank account is frozen, right? And all of a sudden you go, wait a minute, I need you to unfreeze my bank account because I've got to pay all this, I've got to do all these other things. It's really important. I've not done anything wrong. I'm going to present my case in the court and I've got to quickly get a decision because it's that urgent. Yeah. So in a similar way, but using that basis as the reason as to why you need to quickly get a decision,
Mm,
the state of South Africa have quickly gone to the court and said, look, we need an urgent decision on this particular issue. Okay. And the issue is far worse, it's far greater. It's the issue of potential genocide taking place. And it just has to be the potential of genocide. It still means that if the court thinks that there is a chance that this is happening or occurring, then South Africa's or any other country still needs to bring a case in relation to that, a full case that needs to be investigated. Now, some of these cases have been going on for years. In other instances, in other circumstances, okay? But at least we get that piece of paper. Now, we had really big hopes as to why we would be successful in this, because we just had Russia and the Ukraine. And what happened with Russia and Ukraine, there was almost an immediate decision that gave effectively what was wanted from the petitioning party that came in with that particular injunction. Russia, stop, ceasefire, all that kind of jazz. It was all given. Okay. Where the case of South Africa lies, and right now, It's in a bit of a quagmire because it hasn't necessarily stopped the situation. It's given an idea to say stop all the killing, but we can see quite easily that there is no teeth to that particular, there's no bite to that particular decision because of the fact that the day after, more than 100 people have been killed again. Yeah. Yes, they have to report back within a month, but once again, the ICJ's position and what it's able to do to enforce these particular decisions, which were very light, I feel that they were watered down. It was not a ceasefire. Okay. Um, that seems to suggest, again, it's a kick in the face of anyone that wants to think that we have an equal world. We certainly don't have an equal world in relation to what the rule of law is and how it's been practiced.
So are we seeing a change or a change in the international rule of law in terms of the power players? Are we seeing that, the Western countries that historically have had this moral high ground, supposed moral high ground, is that unveiling now, do you think?
I don't think there was ever a moral high ground. If you recall, it's the British that went to India, and and it was the Indians that they used to say, "Look at the British." They tell us the sun never sets on the British Empire. Yeah, it was the Indians that used to sit around saying that's because God doesn't trust the British in the dark, right?
Yeah.
So the point being is that the idea of morality, where morality comes from, ethics, it seems to be written by the victors, and that's exactly what we saw. So at the end of World War II, he said never again. And the countries that necessarily were going to impose this were the 5 permanent members that came on board, have a vote and a say in how the world is run through their veto. And, we had this take place in the Palace of Justice, which is where the ICJ sits in The Hague. Okay. But again, what we see is that it's a inherently one-sided opinion in relation to what happens. And I mean one-sided simply because of the fact of the power of the veto. That's why it's one-sided, because it's just one country that can go against a whole load of others, 150 plus other countries, and say no to what you want. And that power is, well, it's simply not justified in this day and age. We are not, you know, developing countries. We have access to the same information. We have access to the same kind of ideas. We have access to the same, visuals that we see on the TV. We can make our own decisions. So why are those countries not being allowed to do that? It is a failure of the international system, in my opinion.
Absolutely, and I think I just want to go on sort of into the other impacts of the provisional ruling is if the ICJ they said they have jurisdiction in this case, and
Mm.
that there is a potential of genocide occurring, and that Israel have to come back in a month and they have to prove their case again. What does that say about the people that have been supporting sort of hand on heart without any kind of questioning Israel over the last 3 months? Does that put them in a different position?
Yeah,
Is this?
absolutely. It
Go
puts
ahead.
it puts them in a position where it says, well, actually, if there is a further case to be made, we're also going to make that case against you on the basis that you've enabled this, and on the basis that you've given those kind of weapons, given that kind of support. That you know, it wasn't even tacit. It was absolutely open-ended support to the point that you know we didn't know what was going on within the psyche of our politicians. We've got
Mm,
a situation where you have 80% of the uh, well, 80% of the people in parliament saying we're not going to support a ceasefire, yet you've got on the other end 80% of the population of the UK saying
yeah.
we want a ceasefire. I mean, the disconnect is unbelievable. Um, and it all boils down to how power is translated and how power is given across.
Just to put forward this disconnection that we've been seeing. Obviously, we haven't voted for the prime minister that we've got. We didn't vote for any sort of a military intervention in Yemen. All of this has been playing out in front of our eyes, and almost every week we were seeing local and national demonstrations. I mean, in your opinion, again, what is the political status in the UK? I mean, moving towards
It's a
an
failure
election
of
year that
Western
we're coming up.
democracy, isn't it? For me, it's
Yeah.
like a failure of Western democracy on the basis that, you know, I know that there's going to be a whole load of different people that are going to talk about voting and how they're going to vote and how they want to take out this particular person or that particular person.
Mhm.
And I think they've figured out that maybe there's about 35 seats in the UK that if independents were to sit in it, they would probably win from
Mm.
Labour. So really giving Labour the, the bloody nose that that you want to give them and in relation to that. But you really have to think about the longue durée in this as well. You have Parliament, which is supreme, and Parliament has ruled in so many ways. I mean, even if you get those 35 people, you're not probably going to be in a situation where you can stop something like this happening again.
Mm.
So yes, it's a protest vote. It is exactly that. I think that's what it will be. But you also have to think about carefully if there's other ways and methodologies to say, has parliamentary democracy in its own right need to be questioned because of the way in which it's become lame. It's
Mm.
not fighting. You don't have two parties that are absolutely antagonistic to one another and want to necessarily then put things in place. If you have two parties that are more or less agreeing on the point of genocide, when 80% of the population are saying it probably more than likely is
Mm.
genocide that's taking place here. And you remember, the definition of genocide is very clear. It's not just the complete destruction of a people, it's part of a people. You know, that's what's happened. It's not just, the killing, it's the displacement of individuals from one place to another place. These are the definitions of genocide. So the 9 areas that the ICJ looked at, there was no doubt that these were areas that Israel has committed acts in, or at least the ICJ thought that they had a case, there's a case to answer in relation to those particular points. So, we really have to think carefully about our parliamentary democracy and whether or not it's actually delivering change or if it's just delivering rubber stamping.
So just a last point on the ICJ ruling as well. I mean, in the future, there was some mention about the ICC being involved as well, and I think some countries around the world they have sort of put a case towards it. The UK, like you're saying, complicit in what's going on. I think before October, I think back in September, they were trying to um, uh, throw out a case from the ICJ about the ongoing violence in Palestine. This was before October 7th. So in terms of the future of what the ICJ bill or the verdict could do, is that actually going to have any impact on on Palestinian people on what's going in Palestine, or is this something that's going to go just run for years and years and years, and even if we do get a case, it's not really going to have any impact? I mean, what do you think about the actual outcomes of what's going on now?
Well, I think first and foremost, with the ICJ, we've seen what the outcome is. Ruling on day one, ruling on Friday, 150 deaths the next day.
Exactly.
That's where we're at with the ICJ ruling as such. The second point that you have to really look at is in relation to the ICC. The ICC itself is completely is separate from the ICJ.
Yeah.
Okay, so the ICJ is bound by tradition, bound by, from the 1940s where it was set up, and it's to do with states that are connected to the United Nations. The ICC is not connected like that. The ICC is a separate agreement that has taken place where certain countries have signed up to it. Israel is not one of them. The United States is not one of them. And it doesn't look at states, it looks at individual people and individuals. It's actually been useful last, Karim Khan KC, who is the head of the ICC and
Yeah.
is the chief prosecutor. He was quite useful in terms of for the Ukraine and Russia conflict. Straight away, bang, Putin, you are, we consider you a war criminal effectively. There's a case to answer against you. All of a sudden, strong case built up. And then Israel and Palestine happened. Then we had words which we've not heard Putin say, but we have certainly heard people in Israel say,
Yeah.
you are human animals. We will be stopping your food. We will be stopping their water. We will be stopping any kind of aid going in.
Clear genocidal statements. Yeah.
Genocidal statements. These are genocidal statements. Yet Karim Khan has visited Israel. We don't know what was said. We don't know what happened there, but he's not put forward a case to answer. I mean, there's evidence that's being gathered and collected, but again, it all seems a ploy to effectively stay matters until such time as, either they're in a position to do something, fine if that's the case, but I really doubt that that is the case, because if they did want to do something, they could have done something already. It's I have no faith whatsoever in the ICC at this moment in time. You have to remember the ICC was set up following Srebrenica, following the Rwanda massacre. So this is when the Hutus and Tutsis were effectively being killed, and you had the idea of Radio Rwanda. So Radio Rwanda was basically where it was said on the speakers over time, this kind of idea that, you tell a lie long enough, you put it across strong enough, people will start believing you. That kind of Joseph Goebbels idea of what propaganda is. Okay.
Yeah.
And eventually, the minority Tutsis who held a lot of the positions of power were killed by the Houthis. Okay, there was massacres, everything else that we had. The ICC was asked to come in and set up in that kind of environment. It was asked to set up in the environment of, Srebrenica that's taken place.
Mm.
It was a heavy hand in which it had to kind of deal with those things, and it had things like the Truth and Reconciliation Committees, because again, funding and how you fund these things, a way in a process of healing was through an idea of confront the person, make them admit what they've done, and effectively reconcile the countries in that particular way. Where you have the Israel and Palestine conflict, nothing like that has been suggested. Nothing like that is even coming together. It is just blanket silence. And that's why a lot of people are feeling very, very frustrated, not so much at the ICJ, but certainly at the ICC in terms of what it can do and what it should be doing, and is not. Even if it's symbolic, at least take the step and the stage to say, this is wrong.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, one of the things that we've been highlighting on the BMAG podcast is the relationship with everything that's going on internationally, but also nationally in terms of Islamophobia, and that's something that we really want to put the spotlight on, because it is one of the reasons why Muslim lives are so cheap, because of this push. I mean, especially since after 9/11, but even before that, about how Muslims are this bogeyman, and if you let them have too much power or voice, then they're going to take over the world and all this kind of stuff and take your jobs. And obviously, it's affecting every kind of policy in the UK as well. Now there is a lot of pushback, and one of the reasons why we have people like yourself and other organizations that are highlighting Muslim rights, Muslim voices, and promoting organization. There is something that's come up because of the protest vote that we were talking about earlier, the Muslim vote. Do you know much about this, and what are your thoughts about Muslim organizations and people getting more politically
Like I said,
active?
the Muslim vote is there at a time of protest where I understand, for example, I live in an area where there's a very good chance of the prospective parliamentary candidate actually winning that particular seat. But like I said, it's really where this is all going. What we don't want to do is put all of our energies into this thing and think, okay, that's the end product and that's where we're going to be and that's it, we've won now. We haven't. To do justice to the Palestinian people, it's more than just us finding our space in Parliament. Maybe the way in which we look at this is narrative and agency. Okay. Yes, we give ourselves a little bit more agency. Currently, what is agency for the Muslims? Currently, agency for the Muslims is there's a terror attack. Thank you very much. Right, get the Muslim in front of the camera. Here we go. Say your line. Yes, you know what the line is. Killing one is like killing all of humanity. Thank you very much. Get off. That's it. That's your narrative. That's your agency to speak to the world, to kind of say, this is what my voice is. And as a Muslim, we have so much more to say than just that.
Exactly.
And the point being is that maybe this vote allows for more of those particular voices to be heard. But I temper that with a thought process that actually we really need to look at our entire political system to see whether or not that's actually going to be something that can be actualized.
Okay.
Because parliamentary democracy is just so dead right now. It's just lame.
Yeah, it is really worrying how impotent it's become, and how
Mhm.
unilaterally the voice is. It's just one side, and it's just all one voice, whether it's on the historical left or the historical right. There is no right, there is no left anymore, literally. But no, thank you. That's been really, really insightful. So thank you for your time. I always like to let the host talk about anything that they've got going on, or things that they think that the general public could get more involved in. Anything that you've seen over the last few months, or just generally what you're doing, or how you feel the general public can improve their relations.
Well, that the host is you, but okay, I will go as a guest. Um, I think one of the things that we can really look at is um, just coordinating our links together. So, for example, these cases that have come forward, where I've got to know BEMA a bit more, understand that other Muslim organizations that are working around, work with them, and create community, create social capital between yourselves, because once you have that, nothing else matters, because then parliamentary democracy is going to be affected, because then agency does get affected, because at that point you have trust between yourselves, and as you have trust between yourselves, that enables you to have a voice, because you know someone else has got your back. And I think Muslims more and more are finding that it's the civic space that's really coming together. It's this idea that, you know what, we tried with the state and we didn't find a voice with the state. We tried with the individual. I'm not strong enough to do it on my own.
Yeah,
But what I have found is, you know what, there's this space in between the state and the individual, which is civil society effectively.
yeah,
And it's that which has been really, really strong and is starting to come up and is starting to provide a form of agency that we didn't have before. I certainly think in my casework, you know, we're really finding that more and more people are coming together to say, not in my name. And we will say what we want to say because we have something to say. We're not just there to doff our hat to you anymore. We live in this country. We are part of this country. We are part of this polity, and we have something to say where we can benefit society. But at the same time, we want to know what we get out of this transaction as well.
fantastic, fantastic. I'm conscious of time. The meeting might cut out, so apologies if that is. We can just come back on the link. But it really ties in with what we've been trying to do with BMAG. So one of the campaigns that we've got going is we have seen across the country, and it's not just in Nottingham, it's across the country where people have said, look, we're tired of complaining, we're tired of this happening again and again. We don't want to be a reactionary community. We want to take action, and we want to start being a force for change, a force for good. One of the things that we've been highlighting is obviously we want to highlight the BDS movement in terms of what's going on in Palestine and
Yeah.
Gaza. So Barclays, we had a really good protest, a well-attended protest yesterday, where we went
Mm.
out and we raised awareness amongst the community about how complicit Barclays is, and how they arrange funds and funding and finance for the Israeli regime to enact the genocide that they're doing at the moment.
Mhm.
One of the things that we wanted to do was raise awareness in our libraries as well. So we're starting a campaign as BMAG, and I've asked your advice on this, and which is I think
Mm.
what we're going to try and start today. So just at the end of this podcast, I want to raise this issue about the libraries in Nottingham. We sent out a letter to all the libraries in Nottingham. We have their reply. All we wanted to do was highlight and promote Palestinian stories, Palestinian culture, either a story session or something not too dissimilar with what they did with Ukraine, what they do every year with Black Lives Matter. We just wanted to highlight the culture
Mm.
and the stories of the Palestinian people, raise their voices. But apparently that was too contentious, and they said it's too much of a sensitive issue. But they would happily receive a list of books, but they wouldn't help us in organizing something like that. So we wanted to raise this as a campaign in Nottingham to say, look, we want as many people, whoever's listening to this podcast, or whoever's involved in the Palestine movement, or whoever just wants to be there for human rights, to say, look, we demand that this happens. So we're going to start a petition. We want people to come on board and write to their libraries to say that this is what we want. And the
Yep.
more people that we can get onto this campaign, we can build, and we can hopefully get some change done. And hopefully we can get this message across that we're not just going to take this lying down. And this is we don't want to be part of ethnically cleansing the Palestinian people. We want to highlight and raise their voices. So that's one of the campaigns. Any
Yeah.
opinions on that, or anything that you like to raise on
Absolutely.
that?
I think what it is, I'm sure everyone knows what the reason is and why it's important, but I suppose this is a Shawshank Redemption moment. You have to be Andy Dufresne. You have to write a letter every day.
Yeah,
Even if you finally get it, then write two letters. The whole point is that there is a process that you have to undertake. If you're not going to do it one way, if you're not going to do it through engagement because you're afraid to speak, because you don't want the freedom of expression to be highlighted that way, well, you know what? There's other ways of doing that. And that will be through a process of saying 100 people. We all want Normal Finkelstein's book in there. We all want Ilan Pape's book. We want Noam Chomsky and Ilan Pape's on Palestine.
on
Those are
Palestine.
the ways of doing it. I'm going to
Yeah,
stop because I think I know I've got less than a minute.
less than a minute. All right. Well, just thanks again for joining us. It's been very insightful, and I know you're a very busy man, so thank you for taking time out to meet with us today.